Mark was alone in the cold night. The stars were above him, and the wind was sharp against the thin fabric of his tent. He was stationed on a remote alien planet, doing survey work for the colony team he had built, a small camp near the cliffs, and the forest. No one else was nearby. The place was empty for miles, and the silence was deep. He had just finished eating his ration. When he heard the noise, it was soft like a footstep on sand, but not like a human foot. He paused and listened again. There it was, a second step, slow and careful. Something or someone was outside. Mark stepped out, holding his light. He shone it across the rocks. Nothing, he called out, but got no answer. He waited, then slowly walked toward the sound, his boots crunching. On the dry ground behind a large rock he saw her, a girl, small, thin, wrapped in some kind of torn cloth. Her skin had a faint glow like moonlight. Her eyes were big and silver, and they looked scared. She was shivering, her arms crossed over her chest. Mark did not speak at first. She looked young, maybe 15, maybe 20. It was hard to tell with aliens. Her legs were shaking. She looked like she had not eaten in days. She took one step back, and almost fell. He raised his hands, showing he had no weapon. His voice was soft. "You need help. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you," he said. She blinked slowly, then nodded just once. He gave her his water bottle, and she drank fast like she had been thirsty for days. He opened his tent and pointed inside. "It's warm there. You can rest," he said. She hesitated, then walked inside without saying a word. Inside the tent, the heater hummed. She curled up in the corner like a frightened animal. Mark gave her a blanket and an energy bar. She took them with shaking hands but still said nothing. She just stared at the ground. He sat down across from her, watching her silently. After a few minutes, he asked, "What's your name?" She opened her mouth but stopped, then whispered something. It was not clear. Maybe her voice was too weak. Maybe she forgot her name. He said, "Okay, I'll call you Leary, if that's fine." She did not reply, but her eyes moved toward him. Then she nodded once. Her face still had no smile, but there was something calm in her eyes. Now Mark leaned back against the tent wall. He looked at her. Her skin had a pattern like tiny stars, moving slowly like a night sky. Her fingers had extra joints. Her ears were long and thin, but she looked more human than most aliens he had seen. Outside, the wind howled louder. The night got darker. Mark felt uneasy. He looked out the tent flap, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling would not leave. It was like something was watching the tent from far away. He zipped the flap shut and sat again. Leary was asleep now, curled in the blanket like a child. Mark stared at the light of the heater, then at her face. She looked peaceful, but he wondered where she came from, and why she was alone. In the middle of the night, Mark woke up to a strange sound. It was like whispers, soft and close. He thought maybe it was a dream, but then he heard it again, clearer this time, not in human language, not in any language he knew. He looked around. Leary was still asleep, or maybe pretending. Her back was turned. The whispers faded, and the wind outside was silent again. He rubbed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind was racing. Morning came slow. The sky outside was gray. Mark stepped out to stretch, but stopped cold. There were marks in the sand near the tent. They looked like footsteps, but not human, and not Leary's either. 3 toes, sharp, deep prints, circling the tent. He looked around. The area was still empty. No ships, no animals, just his tent and the strange girl inside. Mark felt the chill again, not from the wind, but from something else, something that had passed by in the dark, something that knew they were here. He'd walked back into the tent. Leary was awake. Her eyes followed him. He asked, "Were you outside last night?" She shook her head slowly, then whispered, "I stayed here the whole time." Mark said nothing. He sat down next to the heater, his heart still beating fast. He looked at Leary. Her eyes looked honest, but something deep inside him said this night had changed everything, and that nothing was going to be the same again. The sun rose slowly over the red hills, its light pushing back the cold of the night. Mark sat outside the tent watching the sky, his mind still full of questions. The strange footprints around his tent, the whispers in the night, and the girl sleeping inside. Nothing made sense, but something deep inside told him this was not just a lost alien. Leary stepped out of the tent quietly, her feet bare on the rocky ground. She looked at the sun, then looked at Mark. He offered her a warm drink, and she took it with both hands. She sipped slowly, her eyes on the ground. He asked again, "Do you remember anything? Your name, where you came from?" She paused, her eyes narrowed like she was searching her own mind for answers, but no words came, only silence. Then she whispered, "I remember running. I remember cold. I remember voices in the dark chasing me then." Mark nodded, trying not to press too hard. He knew fear when he saw it. Leary was not just scared, she was broken, like someone had erased parts of her soul. She looked lost even when she stood right in front of him. They spent the day gathering supplies from his storage pod. Mark gave her a pair of boots. Too big, but better than bare feet. She followed him quietly, watching everything like a wild animal learning a new forest. He noticed she flinched every time A noise came from the trees, even the wind seemed to bother her that night. They ate together. She barely spoke, just stared into the heater flame. Then she said softly, I dream of a place, bright lights, people screaming, needles, pain, and machines. But when I wake, I remember nothing else. Mark felt a chill, not from the wind, but from her words. He asked, did someone hurt you? Her lips moved, but no sound came, just a slow nod, then silence again. Later, Mark stepped outside to check the perimeter. He did this every night now since the footprints. Nothing had returned, but the feeling of being watched never left. As he walked past the rocks, he saw something strange again, symbols carved into the dirt near the tent, not deep, just lines and circles and marks he could not understand. He knelt down and studied them. They were fresh too clean to be old. He called to Leary. She came out, her eyes wide when she saw the marks. She stepped back, her breath caught like she recognized them. He asked, did you do this? She shook her head fast. No. I don't know these. I don't know what they are. She looked afraid, truly afraid. Her whole body tensed. That night, she slept far from the tent wall, close to Mark, as if the symbols outside had awakened something in her. She whispered in her sleep. Mark could not understand the words, but they sounded sad. In the middle of the night, the whispers returned louder, this time like a wind full of voices speaking in strange tones, not angry, not kind, just strange. Mark sat up, holding his light, but there was nothing, no movement outside, no creatures. Just the cold and the whispers, and a strange low hum that made the air feel heavy. He turned to look at Leary. She was awake, her eyes open, glowing faintly in the dark. She looked at him, then at the ceiling of the tent, then whispered softly, I remember something. They were taking me somewhere. I escaped. I ran into the forest. I was hiding for days, maybe more. Mark leaned closer. Who were they? Do you remember? Her hands shook. I don't know. Maybe soldiers, maybe doctors. They wore masks. They were not human, and they said. I was not ready for what he asked, but she did not answer, just closed her eyes. Again the next morning, Mark stepped outside again, and found the same marks in the dirt, but this time, they were not near the tent. They were on top of the tent, carved into the fabric, small symbols etched with something sharp, almost like a message or a warning. He showed Leary. She looked at them and froze. She touched one and whispered something in a soft alien language, then turned to Mark and said, this is not a message, it's a locator. They know where I am now. Mark felt a rush of fear. He asked, who are they? But she just said, we have to leave now before they arrive. Mark looked at the horizon. Nothing moved, but the wind was colder than before, and the air felt heavy again, like a storm was coming. Not a storm of rain, but something else, something darker, something not human. He packed quickly, took his gear, gave Leary a pack, and they moved into the hills, away from the camp. Leary looked back, once her eyes full of fear and sadness. She said softly, I am sorry I brought this to you. Mark said nothing, but in his heart he knew he could not leave her now. Whatever she was, whatever had happened to her, she was alone, and he was the only one who cared. As they climbed the rocks, he saw the sky flash. Once far away, then again something was coming, and the girl who forgot her name might be the reason why. Mark and Leary moved through the hills slowly, keeping low between rocks and trees. The sun was setting behind the cliffs, casting long shadows across the land. Mark kept checking behind them, always feeling like something was following. Even when he saw nothing, the feeling stayed. Leary walked close to him, quiet but alert. Her eyes scanned every direction. She still wore the oversized boots and the long jacket Mark had given her. She looked small against the wild alien landscape, but there was something in the way she moved, something sharper than fear, something trained. They stopped near a shallow cave. Mark checked the inside, then nodded. Leary crawled in and sat in the corner, hugging her knees. Mark built a small fire with heat sticks. No smoke, no light, just warmth. They ate quietly, rationed bars, and watered. The silence between them heavy with things unsaid. Mark asked again, do you remember more? Her eyes stared into the cave wall, and she whispered, they took many like me. Some did not survive, some changed. She paused, then said, I ran because I saw what they became. He asked, what do you mean, changed? Her voice shook. Their minds broke. They became tools, weapons. They forgot who they were. They obeyed without choice. I was next, so I ran. I found a hole in the wall and escaped into the woods. I ran until my legs stopped. Then I saw your light. Mark felt a weight in his chest. Not just sadness, but anger. Someone had done this to her. Someone had turned a child into a lab rat, a ghost running from shadows. Later that night, Mark stepped outside to scan the area. He held his sensor and swept slowly across the dark hills. The screen showed nothing but static, then a flicker, then again a signal too faint to trace. Something was out there moving. Without light, he looked up and froze. On the ridge above them stood a figure, tall and thin, arms too long for a normal being. No light, no sound. Just a shape watching him. The figure turned and vanished behind the rocks. Mark rushed back into the cave. Leary looked at him and knew she whispered. They found me. He asked who are they, and she said, I do not know what they call themselves, but I know they are not like others. They are not people. They take people and break them and hide them. They speak in minds, not in words. They live in shadow and only come when they smell. Fearmark took out his rifle and checked the charge. Leary placed her hand on his arm and said, if they come, that weapon will not stop them. You must run if I tell you to run. He said, I will not leave you. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, you are strange, for a human. The night passed with no attack, only sounds outside. Soft clicks, soft whispers, soft wind moving through the grass, but nothing came close. Mark did not sleep. He kept watch, eyes on the cave entrance, hand on the weapon in the early light. Mark and Leary left the cave and moved deeper into the hills. The ground became steeper, and the trees grew thicker. It was hard to move, but safer, harder to track. They reached an old mining site, abandoned years ago. Mark knew about it from old maps. He had never been here before, but it would make a good place to hide inside. The mine was dark and cool. The air smelled of rust and dust, but it was dry and deep. Mark set up a small light and checked the back tunnels. They were empty, full of broken tools and silent stone. Leary walked slowly through the mine, her hand on the wall, her eyes closed like she was listening to something no one else could hear. Mark asked, what do you feel? She said, the stone remembers things. It holds the echo of screams and pain and silence. I do not like this place, but it will do for now. Later. They rested near a broken console. Leary sat close to the wall. Mark gave her another blanket. She looked tired, more tired than before. He asked, are you okay? She said, each day I stay free. My mind returns little by little, but so does the pain. I remember faces, I remember fire, I remember machines, and I remember a boy who screamed and then vanished. Mark said gently, you are not alone anymore. We will get through this together. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the fear faded just. Then the sensor beeped again, a pulse stronger. This time something was approaching fast, not from above, but from below, from inside the tunnels. Mark stood and pointed his light into the darkness. The air felt heavy again, thicker, like something old was waking up. Lori stood beside him, her eyes glowing faintly again. She whispered, they are already here. Deep inside the mine came a sound, a low hum, a whisper, not in air, but in mind. Mark gripped his rifle, but his hands shook. Something in that sound made his thoughts blur like fog covering his memory. Esther reached out and held his arm, her voice clear. Fight it, do not listen. They speak in lies, they twist the mind. Stay with me. Mark focused on her voice, not the sound, not the pull, not the cold. He blinked hard, and the fog faded. He looked at Leary and nodded. He would not let them take her. He would not lose himself. Deep inside the tunnel, two lights appeared, small and red, unmoving, watching. The watchers had found them, and now the real game was beginning. The two red lights in the tunnel did not blink, did not move, just stared into the darkness. Mark kept his weapon ready, but he knew deep inside that bullets would not help against whatever was out there. Leary stood beside him, silent, her eyes locked on the red glow. Mark whispered, do you know what that is? She nodded slowly, her voice low. They are scouts, not flesh, not spirit. They search for me always. They cannot be reasoned with. They only obey. The humming sound returned, growing louder, filling the mine with a low vibration. The walls seemed to shake just slightly, as if something deep underground was moving toward them. Mark took Leary's hand and pulled her back into the mine tunnels, trying to find a narrow path where the watchers could not follow. They moved quickly through the dark, Leary guiding them without hesitation. She seemed to know which turns to take, which paths were safe. Mark followed her, trusting her completely, as the humming grew stronger behind. Then they reached a deep chamber far from the surface. The air was cold and dry. Broken crates and metal boxes were scattered around the floor, old mining equipment, rusted and dead. Mark closed the heavy gate behind them and braced it with metal rods. Leary sat down on the ground, her breathing heavy, her hands trembling. Mark asked, are you all right? She looked at him and said softly, I can't hide anymore. They will find us no matter where we go. Mark sat beside her, his voice calm. Then we fight together. She looked at him with wide eyes, as if surprised by his words. No one ever said that to me before. She whispered, they all ran when they saw what I became. Mark asked, what do you mean? What did you become? She stood slowly, her face filled with pain and fear. I tried to forget. I tried to stay small and silent, but they forced something inside me. They changed me, and I don't know if I am still me. The ground shook, dust fell from the ceiling. Leary took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the room. She raised her hands and closed her eyes. Mark watched as a soft blue light began to glow. From her skin, her hair lifted slightly, her feet rose just above the ground, her body shifted, but not in a painful way. It looked like she was peeling off a mask, not of flesh, but of memory. Her form grew taller, her eyes glowed like distant stars, her Voice echoed not in volume but in depth, a sound that felt ancient and kind, and strong. Mark stood still, watching her change. The girl who had once shivered in the cold was now something powerful. Her body was wrapped in soft light, her fingers long and glowing with lines like circuits. Her back had thin lines that looked like wings made of light, but they did not flap, they shimmered in play. She opened her eyes and looked at him, but she did not speak with her mouth. Instead, her voice entered his mind, calm and full of sorrow. I am sorry, I did not want you to see this. I wanted to be human, I wanted to be small, but I cannot hide anymore. Mark did not step back, he did not raise his weapon. Instead, he walked closer and said, I do not care what you are. You saved me back there, you warned me, you trusted me, that is enough for me. The chamber walls began to glow with the same light that came from her body. The symbols from before appeared again, but this time they made sense to Leary. She read them aloud, and her voice grew stronger. The Watchers cannot enter this room, unless we let them. The old ones built it as a shield, a last place of peace. Mark asked, can we use it to fight them? She said, not fight, but delay. I need time to finish what they started. I need time to make it right. The humming outside turned into a sharp buzz. The door behind them shook. The Watchers were trying to break through. Mark checked the metal rods. They held for now, but he knew not for long. Leary stepped into the center again. She placed her hands on the floor, and the entire room lit up. She said, I need to connect to the old grid. I need to reach what they tried to erase. I need to become who I was meant to be. Mark stood guard as she worked, her body glowing brighter with each passing second. He could feel the heat from her energy, not burning but alive. The Watchers outside screamed, a sound like metal tearing and fire cracking. The wall cracked just a little. Leary said, I remember now. I was born to guide, not to destroy. I was made to open the path between minds, not close them. I was never meant to be a weapon, but they forced me into that shape. Mark shouted, then be what you choose, not what they forced. And she smiled, her first real smile since they met. The light around her pulsed and flowed into the walls, into the stone, into the air outside. The Watchers stopped screaming. The humming faded into silence. The mine grew still. Again Leary collapsed into his arms. Her glow dim, but still there. She whispered, thank you for seeing me and not running away. Mark held her tight and said, I saw you long before the light came out. The door behind them was cracked. The way forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. She was no longer. The air was still inside the chamber. The glow from the walls had faded, but the warmth remained. Mark sat beside Leary, holding her gently. She looked weak but alive, her breathing steady, her body no longer glowing but come outside. The mine, the sky, began to change. Thin black lines moved across the clouds, not smoke, not ships, just lines that cut the sky like cracks in glass. Mark stepped to the edge of the tunnel and looked out. The old scanner in his hand beeped wildly. Something massive was coming, something not of Earth. Leary stood slowly, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. They found me, not the Watchers, not the scouts, the ones who made them, the ones who built the place where I was changed. They do not care if the world burns. They only want control. They want me back, not because I am special, but because I escaped. Mark asked, what are they called? She looked at him with tired eyes and said, I do not know their name, only their goal. They want silence across the stars. They want obedience. They want every voice to sound like theirs. A low hum returned, not from the tunnels but from the sky above. It was not one ship, it was many dark shapes, moving like shadows with no engines, no lights, just presence. They were above the cliffs, above the hills, above everything. Mark watched in silence as one of the ships moved lower. It did not land, it hovered above the ground, and something dropped from its side. A long thin object like a spike. It hit the ground without sound, and then the earth began to shake. Leary grabbed his arm, her voice urgent, we must leave this place. They will not stop until it is ash. This mine is not enough to hide us. We need open sky. We need distance. Mark nodded and packed what little they had left. He gave Leary his last water bottle. She took it with a weak smile and followed him into the light of day. They moved quickly through the hills, keeping to the shadows. The black ships above did not chase, but they watched always. Mark felt their gaze like heat on his back even when they stopped to rest. The feeling never faded in the distance. A communication tower stood broken, but still tall. Mark pointed to it. If we reach that, I might be able to send a signal. Maybe Earth Command, maybe someone will hear us. Leary nodded, but said nothing. Her eyes locked on the sky. They reached the tower by nightfall. It was half collapsed, and the wires hung like vines. Mark climbed to the console and worked fast, his hands shaking. The screen flickered, and then came to life. Faint power still pulsed through the metal. He typed in the emergency code. A signal burst into the sky like a silent flare. No light, no color, just data moving faster than sight. He hoped someone out there was listening. He hoped someone still Cared behind him, Leary stared at the sky, her eyes wide. Something is happening, she whispered, not to him, but to the stars. As Mark turned to see the black ships moving again, not toward them, but toward the signal he sent, they were listening to, and now they knew he was not alone. The screen on the tower blinked, and a voice came through, static-filled and broken but human. "This is Outpost Delta. We received your signal. Identify yourself." Mark replied fast, human surveyor named Mark Fletcher, with a friendly, alien life form. Under attack by unknown force, request backup and extraction. The voice paused, then said backup en route. Estimated arrival 12 hours, hold position. If possible. Mark smiled for the first time in days. He looked at Leary and said, "Help is coming." She looked unsure, then said quietly, "They will not let you escape. They do not care if you are human or not. They only care that you helped me." The sky flashed again, but this time with color. Blue and green lines spiraled in the clouds, and a second group of ships appeared. These ones were different, lighter, brighter, moving with grace, not silent. Celery gasped. "I know them, not from memory, but from dreams. They are not enemies. They are the ones who built the first gate. They are the ones who lost to the silence long ago." Mark watched as the two fleets faced each other above the valley, silent, cold, ready for war. He turned to Leary and asked, "What now?" She said, "Now we wait and hope. The stars remember mercy." He helped her down into a cave beneath the tower and covered the entrance with brush. He set up the last of the heaters and handed her a ration bar. She ate slowly, her strength returning bit by bit. Above them the sky tore open, light and dark clashing in silent fury. No sound reached the ground, but the earth shook with power. The war for one girl had begun, and Mark knew this was no longer just about her escape. It was about what she was, what she remembered, and what she could awaken in others like her across the stars. The girl who had once been cold and afraid now sat in a dark cave, glowing faintly, her eyes steady, her voice clear. "They will not break me again." And beside her, the human who chose not to run made a silent promise. He would not let them, not now, not ever. The cave was cold, and the sounds from the sky made the ground tremble, but Mark did not move. He sat near the entrance with his rifle ready, even though he knew it would do little against what floated above. He kept his eyes sharp and his heart steady. Leary rested behind him, her head against the rock, her body still glowing faintly, but her strength not yet returned. Mark remembered the voice from the tower, the promise of help arriving in 12 hours, but already hours had passed, and no sign had come. Nothing in the sky looked like human ships, only dark shadows and swirling lights and alien storms made of energy he did not understand. Leary opened her eyes slowly, her voice soft like wind. "Through trees they are searching again. They know you called for help. They know you are not like them. You are not silent, and you are not afraid." Mark turned to her and smiled just a little. "I am afraid, but I am still here." She sat up, her body shaking from effort, but her eyes bright. "You should have left when you had the chance. You should have saved yourself." He looked at her and shook his head, slow and calm. "I gave you shelter because you needed it, not because I wanted something in return. I stayed because running never solves the root of this problem. I stay because I believe you are worth it." Leary said nothing, but a tear moved down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. Something older than memory. She looked at him and whispered, "I was made to open doors, not to choose who walks through them. You chose." Outside the sky screamed without sound. Black ships moved in slow circles around the mountain. The enemy did not rush. They waited with patience. They believed fear would do their work for them. They believed silence would win again. Mark stepped outside the cave just a little. He looked up and held the signal booster high. The message kept repeating, "Help needed. Alien life form in danger. Human at risk. Backup requested." He repeated it again and again, not knowing if anyone was even listening anymore. He heard the sound before. He saw the light, a soft pulse in the air like a heartbeat. Then a flash across the clouds, and then silence again, then a second pulse. This one, stronger and closer. Leary stood at the cave entrance, her eyes wide and full of something like hope, or maybe fear of hope. She said, "Something is coming, something older than the ones who hunt us, something from before the silence, something that remembers what it means to choose." The air grew heavy with power. The sky split again, but not with darkness, this time with gold and white and swirling blue. From beyond the stars came a ship unlike the others, tall and thin and made of light, and thought it moved not with engines, but with will. The black ships turned toward it like insects. Sensing fire, the watchers launched beams of dark energy. The sky filled with storms, but the new ship did not break. It moved through the attacks like wind, through leaves. Mark watched as the light ship reached the mountain. It hovered above the cliffs, then slowly lowered. A beam of soft white light touched the ground, and the earth stopped shaking. Leary stepped toward it, her body drawn by something ancient, but then the black ships moved again, faster than before. One dropped lower to low, its engines shaking. The cliffs, a dark figure leaped from the ship. Not metal, not flesh, but something in between, tall with no face and too many arms. It landed near the cave and walked toward them. Slow and silent, Mark raised his rifle and aimed, but Leary stepped in front of him, her voice calm. "He is not here for you, he is here for me," Mark said. "Then, he will have to go through me." First Leary turned to him, her voice firm and clear. "You cannot win this fight with weapons only. With will only, with memory only, with choice." She walked forward toward the creature, her glow returning, her steps steady. The creature reached out with one arm, but she raised her hand, and the air between them cracked like glass. Her voice filled the valley, not with sound, but with light. "You made me forget, you made me obey, you made me nothing, but now I remember who I am." The creature staggered back like it felt pain, then it reached for her again, but Mark was there too, standing beside her, holding a broken metal rod, not to fight, but to stand between her and the silent celery. Touched the creature and light poured from her hand into its body. It shook and screamed, but not with noise. It screamed with broken memories, with failed control, with lost power. Then it fell to its knees and vanished into dust. The black ship above turned and fled. The others began to retreat. One by one the sky cleared. The mountain stood tall again. Mark turned to Leary. She looked tired but strong. He smiled and said, "You did." She smiled back and said, "No, we didn't." The sky, the light ship hovered, still waiting, watching. Then slowly it opened, and a voice came down, clear and warm. "The war is not over, but the silence has been broken. We heard your call. We are." He announced for the first time since this began. Mark felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt hope. The sky was quiet for the first time since everything began. The ships that once haunted the air had vanished. The watchers had been silenced, and the shadows that crept across the hills were no more. Mark stood at the edge of the mountain watching. The strange light ship above it shimmered without making a sound, its surface like flowing water made of starlight. Leary stood beside him, her glow soft and steady, her face calm but thoughtful. The wind touched her hair, and for once, it felt like peace. Mark looked at her and saw something different. Not fear, not confusion, but purpose. She was no longer hiding, no longer broken. She was whole. A voice from the light ship spoke again, not through sound, but through feeling, through thoughts that filled the air with warmth and meaning. "You were not alone. You were never forgotten. We could not reach you until the silence was broken. Now the path is clear. Now the stars will listen." Again Leary closed her eyes, as if hearing the voice in her soul. Her body shimmered slightly, as if responding to a frequency only she could feel. She turned to Mark, her voice strong and clear. "I am ready now. I know who I am. I remember the gates. I remember the purpose they gave me before they tried to change me." Mark asked, "What will you do now?" She looked at him and said, "I will open the way again. I will wake the others like me. I will remind them that they were not built to obey, but born to choose." He nodded slowly, knowing deep inside that this moment was not an end, but the start of something greater. He asked, "And what about me? Where do I go?" Now she stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "You chose me before I knew myself. You stayed when even I wanted to run. You were part of this. To not just as a protector, but as a witness, as a bridge between worlds." From the sky, a beam of light descended, not harsh, not bright, but soft and warm. Leary looked up and then back at Mark. "The ship is calling me. It is time to rise. It is time to speak across the stars." Mark took her hand and held it tight. He did not want to let go, but he knew he had to. Leary smiled, not sad, not afraid, just grateful. "I will not forget you. You are written in my memory now, forever." She stepped into the beam, and her body lifted slowly, not like flight, but like released. The air shimmered around her. Her glow merged with the light, and for a moment, she looked like a star come down to earth. The ship opened, and she vanished inside. The light faded, and the ship turned upward slowly. Then, with a single ripple, it vanished into the sky, leaving no trace. Only silence. Mark stood alone on the mountain. The wind around him gentled the earth, no longer shaking, the fear no longer pressing against his skin. He looked up into the stars and whispered, "Thank you." Hours passed before another ship arrived. This one, human, marked with the symbol of Earth Command. It hovered above, and a ladder dropped. Mark climbed aboard and met the faces of soldiers and scientists. Looking at him with questions, he said only one sentence before falling into sleep. "I gave shelter to a girl, and she gave meaning to the stars' days." Past then weeks, Mark told his story to those who listened. Some believed, some doubted, but the data they found at the site, the broken tech, the strange signals, the erased logs, all pointed to something beyond normal understanding. One night, while resting in the outpost, Mark saw something on his console, a message not in human script, but one he now understood. It was her voice, not sound but thought, and it said, "We are awake, we remember, we choose, and we thank Mark smiled and looked out the window. The stars seemed brighter than before. The silence had broken, and the girl who had once been shivering in the cold had become a beacon across the stars. He whispered to himself. She was never just a lost child. She was a door, a key, a fire waiting to burn away the dark, and I was the fool who thought I was saving her, when in truth she saved us all. The screen blinked again with one final line. The journey is not over. Come find us when you are ready. Mark stood from his chair, grabbed his pack and walked toward the hangar. He looked at the stars one last time and said aloud, "Then let the next chapter begin." And the stars answered with light.